well, let's get started. I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank the Corning Foundation, which is from Corning Life Sciences here in Tewksbury, for co-sponsoring tonight's event and co-sponsoring all our virtual author visits for the foreseeable future. We appreciate their generosity. They recently awarded the library with a fairly significant grant to hold virtual author visits during COVID-19. Also want to thank my friend Stephanie over at the Memorial Hall Library in Andover for partnering with us tonight and assisting with publicity. So we'll get right into it. I just want to do two quick logistical things. I am recording tonight's event. You all should have consented to that when you entered from the waiting room. And also, just a heads up, I will be sending everyone an email tomorrow morning who's watching live here on Zoom with a link to a feedback survey. Please take 30 seconds and fill that out. Additionally, there'll be a link to the recording for today's events, and also a link, I'll probably just use an Amazon link, an opportunity for you to purchase a copy of tonight's book. So look for that email tomorrow morning. Keep an eye out for that. And just to set expectations, I anticipate tonight's program lasting approximately an hour or so. We kind of have tonight divided into like 4 different sections. And I think I've stalled enough, so hopefully everyone who's coming is already here. And let me introduce Thomas. So tonight we're joined by author Thomas Farmen for a presentation on his book, Bessie's Story, Watching the Lights Go Out. Bessie's story is an inspiring story about a charming, brave chocolate lab who gradually loses her eyesight. The author leads the reader from the unexpected diagnosis of terminal blindness for his beloved 4-year-old pet through the 2.5-year transition to sightlessness. In the process, Bessie unwittingly becomes an expert mentor and teacher for the high-wire act of growing older with grace and optimism. So Thomas Farmen is the headmaster emeritus of Rumsey Hall School in Washington, Connecticut. He and his wife, Ashley, who's about to make a cameo appearance, worked in partnership at the school for over 4 decades, and they now live in New Hampshire. Dog owners for all of their 40-plus years of marriage, the Farmens travel, pursue a variety of outdoor interests, and are active volunteers. Ashley is a New Hampshire Grand Estate Ambassador, while Tom serves on the board of several nonprofit organizations, including the Special Olympics of New Hampshire. So all of us watching live on Zoom, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Thomas, Ashley, and Betsy for joining us here tonight. And Thomas, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Hi, and thanks for joining us. And my thanks also to the Corning Foundation. It's great that they stepped up like that. To keep these kind of programs going. I want to introduce you to the important star of this. So there's Bessie, and you can see those eyes. They're completely white and have been for a while, but she seems to look right at you when you talk to her. And we've got, I want you to think of us right now as being standing in front of a funnel, a fairly large funnel, and we're going to start putting stuff into this. And hopefully at the end, when we have that last drop come out of the funnel, you'll go back to your normal everyday routines with a little more enthusiasm, optimism, maybe a little more resilience, more bounce in your step. That's the aim, and I hope I can take you there. We're going to start with 4 videos. Each one's a minute or less. And it's just going to give you a chance to see Bessie doing normal stuff, not just standing next to me or sitting next to me as she is right now, but what we see Bessie doing almost every day. So Robert, let's run that.
Great. One moment,
please.
Yeah. Let's see here. 1 second, Tom, I forgot to do a step that I learned about the sound. 1 second. Okay. Share sound, that's what I wanted to do. Okay. And I did the wrong thing. I'm one more time. I'll get it right this time, I promise.
Don't worry.
Right.
I'm glad I'm not sitting in your seat right now.
Okay. Okay, now we're cooking. All right, so as Tom said, you're going to see several short clips of, was it 5 videos, Tom?
Yeah, I guess there are. One of them's just about 10 seconds.
Okay. I'm going to get to it, and let me just, here we go.
There is a permanent wrinkle in the middle of Bessie's forehead, the result of opening her eyes as wide as she absolutely can for most of her waking hours. Bessie was 4 years old and I was 61 when we learned that she was gradually going blind. She appears to believe her relentless effort will pay off and the world will somehow light up again if she just opens those white, filmy eyes wide enough. This book is about our charming, brave Chocolate Lab's 2.5-year transition to sightlessness and her adjustment to a world of darkness. In the process, Bessie unwittingly became an expert mentor and teacher for the high-wire act of growing older with grace and optimism. Because of her, I've become more watchful, mindful, compassionate, and ingenious, dreaming up new ways to make her life better. Atta girl. This is our story. Want to play hockey? Good girl. Drop. You want to play soccer today? All right, here we go. Go. Drop. Sit. 1, 2, 3. Drop. Would you like to go again? Would you like to go again? Hey, go. Go. She'll find it eventually. Here you go. Here, Bess.
Next time you have a big problem, a really challenging task in front of you, and you're
Okay,
starting to lose confidence and thinking about giving up, remember this video in particular.
right there. There you go. Come on. Okay. Come on.
I'm never tired watching that. All right, there we go. So let's flip over to the PowerPoint now, please, Robert.
Absolutely. One sec.
I hope those videos gave you a chance to see Bessie in her normal daily routine, the kind of things we see her do every day.
Let's see, one sec.
There we go.
Great.
All right, so bear with us as I go through this. I'm going to ask Robert to switch the slides now and then. And what I'm going to do is take you through the transition of Bessie's blindness. And to do that, I've got to start at the beginning. And this is the very first page of the book. There are, by the way, 31 chapters. I'm going to read short excerpts from 8 of them. So you're not going to be listening to me all night. And this is from the very first page. Before we begin, when my wife Ashley and I visited a kennel in a rural New Hampshire town to select a chocolate Labrador puppy, we had some reservations. The parents of the litter were described as healthy, purebred labs, but the mother was mysterious, aloof, and detached, not to mention that her hair was falling out. And the father was out of the picture, apparently having disappeared like a deadbeat dad who'd slipped out of town before the police arrived. Then the kennel's owner opened the small pen and 8 adorable lab puppies poured out, slipping and sliding all over each other like fish from a net, all except one. The last pup peered out at us, inched her way into the sunlight, and parked herself softly on Ashley's feet. And that's the day we fell in love with Bessie. She was just 7 weeks old, and we already knew we had the perfect dog. This book begins 4 years later, when Bessie's perfection began rising to new levels. So that's the 7-week-old puppy that we brought home. And if you've ever had a puppy and picked it up at a kennel or a breeder, you know that 7 weeks is way too young to pick them up. They usually don't let them go till 8 or 10 weeks. But how could we possibly refuse their offer to that face? And notice the eyes are blue, as they are often with young labs. We subsequently found out of those 9 puppies, 4 of them went blind from the same thing. And so there was a lot of overbreeding going on there, but no regrets on our part. Next slide, please. This is maybe a week or so later. Next slide, please. And this is Bess. Her eyes now have turned normal brown lab eyes. And she's probably about 6 or 7 weeks old there. I'm sorry, she's probably about 8 or 9 weeks old here. Maybe a couple months at least. Next slide, please. And this is Bessie at 1 year old. And she's back in the same place where that first picture was taken. And if any of you listening have ever had a lab or raised a lab, you know this look. It's huge heart, low IQ. And that's Bessie at 1 year old. Next slide. This is Bess at 2. Still no indication that there was blindness in her future, nothing in her behavior or her appearance that would lead us to believe that. Next slide. This is Bessie at about 3.5. And I'm going to stop here and read an excerpt from the first chapter, which is called Time Remaining. There's a beautiful quote at the beginning of it. The afternoon knows what the morning never suspected. Robert Frost said that. Turning 61 was a wonderful surprise. Simple pleasures were magnified. I became a better listener. Judgments were forgotten and forgiven, and I talked less because there was really not much point. By 61, a person has experienced most of the personal and universal joys and heartaches life can serve up, either directly or with 1 degree of separation. By 61, you get it, or you should. There's a faint drumbeat in the room when a person passes 60. It's called TR, time remaining. You realize how quickly time passed between 40 and 60 and understand that by some esoteric law of physics, the next 20 years will be a blur. But even with all this life experience, I'm stunned when Ashley returns from a routine visit to the veterinarian with unsettling news. Our silly 4-year-old Bessie is losing her sight. According to her doctor, this sweet dog will be blind in 12 months. She has something called progressive retinal atrophy, an inherited disease that causes the degeneration of the retinas and results in permanent blindness. The doctor speculates that she currently has approximately 85% of her vision in daylight and 50% when it's dark. On walks after sunset, she bumps into things, stumbles occasionally, and takes it slow. I thought that was just Bessie's style, but now I know better. When the sun comes up, she's fearless and full speed. Yet with each morning walk, I look for a hint of fading glory. And almost subconsciously, I realize Bessie is my GPS for the coming years of advancing age. This is just what she looked like when we got the diagnosis. So you can imagine how we felt when we're looking at her and this is her appearance and the vet says, this dog will be blind in a year. It was a moment for me, and I said, this dog's going to be my mentor. She's going to go through, in a very short period of time, a real change in life. And so I'll keep a diary of how she handles it, and she'll be my mentor. And I can look back on this later on when I need a pat on the back or a kick in the pants. Next slide, please, Robert. I actually did a lot more research than I did about blind dogs. And one of the things that can happen is as their eyesight fades, they become depressed. Now, we didn't see evidence of that in Bessie, and I personally don't think she has that gene in her DNA. But nevertheless, we decided it would be important to have a sleepover. And so this chapter is called House Guest. And this picture was taken before Bessie went blind or was diagnosed, but the characters are the same. So this chapter again is House Guests. And the quote says at the beginning, what a hell of a heaven it will be when they get all these hypocrites assembled there. Mark Twain said that. So the diagnosis came in September. We made it through October, November, December. Holidays are over, thank goodness. And now we were into January when Ashley said, let's have a sleepover and raise Bessie's spirits. Her two best canine friends happen to be Tula and Tui, the dogs owned by her sons. Both are female. Tula is a seasoned pit bull mutt from Brooklyn. Our older son, Tyler, rescued her as a puppy during his college days when the couple who owned her broke up and couldn't decide who would take the dog. Tula spent multiple hours a day chained to a post by a Fort Greene brownstone until our son adopted her. She has the Venus symbol for woman tattooed on her stomach. Tula was spayed as a puppy, and this must have been a message to all of her suitors from Flatbush. Save your ammo, boys. She wears it well. Once a cheerful sweetheart, Tula's a bit crotchety now at 11 years old, gray in the face, but still beautifully sleek, like some aging Hollywood star who spends hours each day with a personal trainer and a nutritionist and is close friends with a cosmetic surgeon. You know, the type who looks great from a distance, but more like something from a wax museum up close. Tula's a sweetie, but her demeanor can convey a strong sense of entitlement. Our other guest is Tui, a border collie named after a large honey-eating bird of New Zealand where she was born. Our younger son, Trevor, traded a quart of firewood for Tui in Wanaka on the South Island, where he spent a year after college. She flew home with him to New York, and after almost 2 days of air travel in a crate, she walked out of baggage claim and pooped and peed in the terminal at JFK. I liked her right away. Tui's a genius, bred to herd sheep, hundreds of them, all by herself. If there were colleges for dogs, Tui would get a scholarship to all the Ivies and Stanford. Simply stated, she loves all people and hates all other animals, except Bessie. And that's because Bessie lets Tui do anything to her, including dragging her around by the scruff of her neck. Sometimes I just have to look away. Over the weekend, Ashley and I go for long walks with the dogs, wrestle with them, build snowmen, watch football games, take naps, you know, regular January things. And as the hours pass, I realize that Bessie, the youngest, is acting like the oldest. She thoughtfully relents to everything, like a lost breed of politician who knows how to compromise and get along with diverse groups. This trio of dog characters meshes like a three-part harmony because Bessie defers. I don't think it's insecurity or lack of confidence that makes Bess behave this way. She's like a Buddha who has found enlightenment and simply wants others to be happy and content. Here she is at the age of 4, losing her eyesight day by day, and these other fools are worrying about who sleeps where and who gets the cookies. Once again, this humble dog shines a bright light on our world from her increasingly dark one. Her message, wake up. 99% of the things we do each day are of little or no importance. The only things that really matter are those we do to make life a little better for others. I wish Bessie could look in a mirror and see how beautiful she is. That's not going to happen. But somehow I think she knows she's getting lovelier by the day. You can see it in her eyes. I want to pause here. Does anybody have a question? I can pick it up on the chat here, and I think I can anyway. All right, we'll have time later for questions. And so this next chapter, we've made it through the winter, January, February, March, we're into April. And this chapter is called Spring Training. And the quote at the beginning, some of you may remember this. "What day is it?" "It's today," squeaked Piglet. "Ah, my favorite day," said Pooh. A.A. Milne, Winnie the Pooh. So we made it through the winter and the snow melted, and finally we're into spring. To better understand Bessie's plight, I put on sunglasses one dark evening and walked through our backyard. It's frightening, really. The farther I get from familiar objects, the more I bump into things, and the harder it is to negotiate my path. I throw a ball into the darkness and can't find it. The urge to remove the sunglasses is overpowering, and it affords me another chance to admire how stoically Bessie is coping. When Bessie comes to me with a ball in her mouth, I'm more likely now to drop what I'm doing and give her what she wants, my time. I recall feeling somewhat the same way with our children when they were young and asked me to play catch or go fishing. I knew the day would come when they'd outgrow their interest in being with Dad, so I almost always said yes. With Bessie, it's different. Her ability will disappear before her interest fades, and I can only imagine how terribly confusing and heartbreaking that will be for her. So here I am again, always saying yes. Next slide, please. So Robert mentioned that we worked in a boarding school, and we lived on campus in school housing for 42 years. And Bessie spent the first half of her life there. And one of the traditions the school had was the Blue Dog Parade. It was the first day of the athletic season when the pet owners, the dog owners, would dress their dogs up in school colors and parade them through the campus. And the kids would all reach out, touch them, and pat them and cheer them on. And it was their way, it was our way of kind of getting them psyched up for that first game. And Bessie's dressed in an Elizabethan collar that she's wearing around her waist as a skirt, and a school t-shirt. And then we just threw that pink scarf on to flash her up a little bit. This chapter is called Back in School. And the quote at the beginning, "Don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened." And that's a great reminder. Say that often, try to. So we live right next to the school's largest athletic field, and every afternoon she hears the soccer games, cross-country races, and the intoxicating noise of happy, active kids. Each time Ashley and I walk through the door, Bessie implores us with glaring, glowing green eyes to let her out so she can join the fun. When we do, the kids surround her as if she conveys some secret power. Bessie emits a level of joy and energy that makes everyone around her a little happier. She has no reservations or self-doubts about her obvious weakness. And I think the middle school kids admire this in her, secretly wishing they could handle their own perceived flaws with the same carefree attitude and disposition. A few days after the parade, with pleasant memories guiding her, Bessie follows a group of kids from the athletic fields about half a mile back to the main campus and eventually makes her way to the steps outside my office. She appears as if she's on vacation, has just landed at the airport, and is waiting for her ride. Bessie spends about an hour there picking up head scratches and hugs, the way a street musician collects dollars and spare change from passersby for a well-played melody. Excuse me. I watch her from my office window for a while and smile at the grace she conveys, surveying a landscape she can't really see, but understands. For Bessie, the beginning of every day is like the start of a brilliant sun-kissed morning after a heavy rainstorm, when the world is scrubbed clean and filled with endless promise and freshness. She heads out the door each morning with boundless high hopes and great faith, no, blind faith, that this will be the best day of her life. If Bessie could talk, I'm pretty sure she'd simply say, "Be strong and spread joy." And that's a pretty good message from a dog whose world is getting darker every day. Next slide, please. This is Bessie at about, probably about, I'm going to guess coming up on 2 years after the original diagnosis, maybe a little less than that, year and a half. And if we were together, I'd say, "What do you notice about those eyes?" And of course you'd say, you know, they're green. And what those are really are her pupils. They're completely dilated, and we're on a lake with white ice on a beautiful sunny day in January, and she's got a hockey puck that she's dropping on the ice. But those pupils should be little pinpricks. Instead, they're completely dilated to let as much light as possible back to those decaying retinas. That was her body's way of kind of coping with what was happening. And so this chapter is called Annual Checkup. And the quote at the beginning, there are only two forces in the world, the sword and the spirit. In the long run, the sword will always be conquered by the spirit. Napoleon Bonaparte said that. So it's over a year now, and we're back and in the doctor's office, and we're told Bessie's vision was about 85% in daylight and 50% in dim light a year ago. Now, about 18 months later, she perceives about 50% of her world in the sun and more like 10% when it's dark. Now, I'm still playing retriever games with Bess, and sometimes it takes her a few minutes to track the ball down, but she always finds it. Trouble now is that when she locates the ball and turns around with it in her mouth, she can't see me. Poor thing has found her trophy, but she's a retriever, and finding the prize is only half the process. She knows I'm out there somewhere, so her nose goes up in the air like a periscope, her ears perk up like antenna, and she searches. There's a fearlessness in Bessie's spirit. She refuses to give up the game she loves, no matter how difficult or puzzling they become. There's a lot of instinct at work here, but ample doses of courage, resilience, and defiance are also in play. Bessie and I are performing a delicate balancing act. At what point does this game become a mockery of a great dog's fading glory? At what point does it become more comical than productive, more cruel than pleasant? I take my cue from Bessie. Somehow this wonderful girl can still speak with her eyes. Based on my voice, she knows where to find me. And she returns the ball to my feet and looks at me with a penetrating, haunting stare. And though I know she cannot really see me, her message is clear. Don't you dare stop hitting balls from me, ever, no matter how hopeless I may seem. Bessie reminds me that we are defined more by our spirit and effort than by our results. So you can see this diary is really giving some good life lessons. This next chapter is called Right-Eyed Bessie. And if you're a dog owner, you know what happens when your dogs are in the backyard and you shine the spotlight on them or the flashlight. Their eyes glow. They're like headlights in the dark. And we noticed that right about this time, Bessie's right eye was still glowing, but the left one had burned out like a car light, like a headlight. And so this chapter is called Right-Eyed Bessie. And the quote at the beginning, there are some people who see a great deal and some who see very little in the same things. I sometimes wish I had filmed Bessie's transition to blindness. Her mannerisms are pretty much the same. Her body remembers what to do, but the graceful girl is now awkward at times. She's like a ballet dancer who never had to think about her movements in relation to space, gradually becoming clumsy. In some ways, our 6.5-year-old is in her prime. If you watch Bessie from a distance in an open field, you'll see a dog in full. And the closer you get, the clearer her handicap. And when you get close enough to pat her, Bessie will flinch at the touch just for a second till she knows she's safe. And that's when you realize she can't see. And of course, those empty eyes that are turning white tell the story. I see and sense the world differently now. Moments of natural beauty are clearer, richer, more brilliant. Faces are portraits, each one a memorized masterpiece. Shadows are mysterious, fleeting, treasured images painted by the sun. I want to be sure that if the lights go out for me someday, I'll have a catalog of images in my memory bank, just as Bessie does. And in the meantime, we will continue to sit in the sun together and feel the world around us. If Bessie senses I'm next to her, she'll nudge me to scratch her ears that are as soft as the oldest t-shirt in your dresser. And she'll sigh just like she did when she could see, because with her eyes closed, she still can. Next slide, please, Robert. So these are the white eyes that, the eyes that are turning white that I mentioned in that last chapter. And this is Bessie approaching her 7th birthday, maybe 6.5. And we think that she's blind in this picture, but we're not really sure. We aren't sure how to diagnose that. Next slide, please. This is one of Bessie's best friends. This is Kate. And Kate is 6 now. And Kate was 4.5 when this picture was taken, or maybe she was 4, possibly 3. And I love it because if you look up in the top left corner, you see that Bessie's left eye is wide open. And with the right eye, she's winking at us, I think. It's like she's saying, look, I know Kate's not a real vet, but I'm going to let her examine me anyway and let her have her fun. And on the back of Kate's blouse, it says something animal hospital. So, and that plays into this next chapter. I'm gonna skip the title. We've got just a few left. I'm gonna skip the title because it kind of gives away a punchline later on. But the quote at the beginning comes from a young author named Nicole Ray. And when Nicole Ray was about 27, I think, she lost her eyesight rather suddenly. And here's what she had to say about that. When life's got you down, keep your head up. You can't see the ground anyway. I just would love to meet Nicole Ray and spend a little time with her. So we've been wondering what the doctor would use to diagnose Bessie's blindness. And I should say that over the 2.5-year period that we'd been taking her to the vet for these checkups, she'd become like a celebrity. And we would walk in and the clerical staff, the nurses, the doctors, they would all stop what they're doing and come out and get down on a knee and talk to Bessie and look at her face and scratch her head. And it really was like going with a rock star to the vet. So we've been wondering what the final test for blindness will be, what device the doctor might roll out to make a conclusive diagnosis. Ashley and I are pretty sure Bessie's lights have gone out for good, but there's nothing scientific about our analysis. It's just a sense we have. Expecting to see Bessie fitted in some high-tech device that allows us to peer into those 2 milky white holes on her sweet face, we are relieved to see the doctor walk in with a handful of cotton balls. Bessie must overhear us because her ears perk up. If there's a ball involved, she knows there's fun ahead. Not in this case, though. How ironic that the ultimate test for determining Bessie's utter blindness involves an element of her favorite activity. The vet stands about 5 feet away and one by one tosses half a dozen cotton balls at her face from different angles. She doesn't blink or flinch, not a bit. She takes each one like a tough boxer on the ropes, accepting punches with his hands down in the late rounds. Little pieces of fluff bounce off her nose, eyes, and forehead silently and painlessly. But in my mind, each one lands on the floor with a loud crash. The long, slow fade is over. What originally was supposed to take just 12 months has in fact stretched over 2.5 years. The tears well up in our eyes as the finale of the journey sinks in, but there are no tears from Bessie. She's sitting on the examination table with her eyes wide open, her ears at attention, sensing that someone is throwing mysterious things at her. She remembers in the past that there was a treat at the end of each doctor appointment, and her instincts tell her this visit is winding down. She's even drooling a bit in happy expectation of the cookies that are coming. And when something winds down for Bessie, that only means something else is winding up. And when we get home, she jumps out of the car and begins dancing in circles when Ashley promises her a walk. And off they go with Bessie leading the way, guided by a memory burned into the joyful place in her brain where walks are stored. Yes, off they go across the baseball field and onto a path in the woods that Bessie's been walking for 7 years. No leash, just a keen sense of where to go based on experience and instinct, wrapped up in scents and sounds that keep her on the trail. She is connected to Ashley by some invisible tether of trust. Heaven forbid Bessie stop for a minute doing the things she loves just because of a little complication. I watch her disappear on her walk, embarrassed that I ever complained about anything, and vowing never to do it again, ever. Next slide, please. So Bessie loves the holidays, just like all of us. This is Halloween 2 years ago. She decided to dress as a stately elderly woman. And then last year, she decided to go with next slide, please. With a hipper, cooler look. All right, she's got the black wig, some more modern glasses, and this orange dashing scarf around her neck. Next slide, please. No explanation needed for this one. Next slide. Okay. Bessie's loves New Year's Eve like a lot of people do, and she paid the price. Next slide. That's the morning after. Next slide, please. One of my favorites, all-time favorites. So you know this is Valentine's Day. We could put 300 of these on Bessie's face, and she would just sit there and let us do it. My favorite is the one stuck on the end of her nose. And she's just looking at me saying, how long do you want me to stay with these on my face? Next slide, please. That's Bess with her May Day or Easter bonnet on. And you could just see how white those eyes are. Next slide, please. That's Bessie paddleboarding, something she loves to do either by herself or with someone else on the board. And next slide, we're going to slow down for a second here. This is to cover the book. And I mentioned before that I didn't write this as a book. I wrote it as a diary because I knew there'd be times in my life coming up where something would start to go, and I needed my mentor, Bestie, to say, this is how you handle it. So I had this diary that was gaining size and depth. And it finally developed into 176 pages, but it wasn't a book. It was just sitting there as kind of a resource. And a former student was going through a rough patch in his life. This was a guy who used to babysit for our kids. And he came from a great family, but not a family of any great means. And so from our school, he earned a scholarship and went off to Phillips Exeter Academy, became president of his class. From there, he earned a scholarship to Cal Berkeley. And after he graduated from Cal Berkeley, came back to Boston and worked with City Year for a year. He gave up a year of his life to go back into the inner city high schools and say, hey, no excuses. Look what I did, and I'm going to show you how you can do it too. Mentoring these high school juniors and seniors to get them on a college track path. And then he went off to graduate school at the Kellogg School of Business at Northwestern, earned his MBA, and now he's managing money for you know who out in California. He's done really, really well, and he's super generous. But he was going through a real tough patch, and so I sent him one of the chapters. And a couple of days later, he wrote back. He said, "Where did this come from?" I told him the story, and he said, "Send me the rest of it, would you please?" Which I did, and he plowed through it. And a few days later, he said, "We've got to make this into a book." And I said, "I don't have the first idea what to do." He said, "Well, let that be where I can come back and help you, because you helped me, let me help you." And that's just the kind of guy he is. So we have Bessie's story, Watching the Lights Go Out, which is sold over 3,000 copies now, and I think touched a lot of lives in a really good way. And thanks to John. If there's any teachers listening in, you would love that story, because you never know when it's going to flip and those kids will come back and do something for you. Next slide, please. So we take Bessie to schools. We've visited, I don't know, probably a couple dozen schools at least. And we also go to libraries, as we are this evening, and senior living communities and Rotary clubs and library and bookstores and things like that. But our favorite is going to schools. And if you look at this picture, you can find Bessie in the center, and the kids are all reaching out. They just have to touch her. They want to get as close as they can. And they are inquisitive and affectionate and so interested in Bessie. And so we use Bessie to try to reinforce 3 messages, which are good for all ages, but they really hit home with kids. Next slide, please, Robert. The first one is, look, we've all got insecurities and flaws and weaknesses, and they'll hold them back if we let them. If we let them, they'll become brakes on our engines. And I tell the kids, take those weaknesses, accept them. That's part of what separates you from the crowd. It makes you stronger. It's gas in your tank. It's part of your fuel. Embrace it. And I also say, everybody in this room has them, kids. And I point to their principal and I'll say, even Mrs. or Ms. or Mr. And they kind of shake their heads and go, "Oh, no, not her." And I say, "Yep, she does." The other thing we say is asking for help and accepting help are essential to being successful and happy. The happiest people I know, the most successful people I know, are really good at saying, hey, I need help with this. Or when someone says, can I help you? They say, yes, please. And we tell the kids if they know someone who needs help and they can't provide it, talk to their teacher, their coach, their parents, find out someone will be able to help your friend with their problem. And then the last one, and Robert, would you flip back to that previous slide for a minute? All right, so hold that image in your head, and then let's go back again. Go forward. I tell the kids, no, I'm sorry, back to there we go. I tell the kids being around people with handicaps should bring out the same behavior Bessie elicits. And I say to them, what would you do if a blind person walked in here right now, tapping her cane on the floor, or someone in a wheelchair, or someone with intellectual disabilities? They would very likely sit on their hands, zip their lips, and not know what to say or do. They would just freeze. And our message is respond to those people the same way you've responded to Bessie. Ask them questions, offer to help, show some interest. And I say, kids, if you do, you're going to find a heaven on earth that you didn't know existed. And we're pretty sure the message gets through. Next slide, please, Robert. So there's a fifth grade student from the Violet School in Alstead, New Hampshire, I think. She sent this. This was her interpretation of the cover of the book, Watching the Lights Go Out. And next slide, please, Robert. This is a sixth grader from the Demi Grammar School in Methuen, Massachusetts. Tenney Grammar School with a T. Tenney Grammar School, and he said, you just got to keep your head up. That was his takeaway from the visit. Next slide, please. We donate a portion of the proceeds from our speaking engagements and our books to an organization called needs.org. It's in Princeton, Massachusetts. Some of you may be aware of it. I'll bet there's some head nodding going on right now. And because of our partnership, Needs named this little pup Bessie. They named her after our Bessie, and this was her at the very beginning of her enrollment. Unfortunately, Bessie flunked out. She made it past the year, and then right at the end, I think it was something as minor as she would turn her head if a horn honked when she was with the person she was supposed to be guiding. And these dogs work with wounded veterans, blind people, people with autism. They're just tremendous, tremendous helpers. So Bessie flunked out, and next slide, please, Robert. So this is Bessie 2. We've got another Bessie in the program now, and I don't know. Look at that face. Don't you just see a striking intelligence in there? The confidence on her face. So we've got our fingers crossed and our hopes pinned that Bessie's going to make it all the way to graduation. Next slide, please. We're going to stop here for a moment. If we were together, I would ask you, I'd say, what do you notice about this slide in particular? And I'm going to guess that some of your comments are, well, she's lost weight. Yes, she has, but some of that's the angle of the camera. Her face seems to have changed, and it's the eyes. The eyes are open wider when she's blind. And I find this picture inspiring. Can you imagine that? You're blind and you open your eyes wider to see the world. And so the takeaway message here is, if you can't understand something, open your mind wider. If you can't accept someone, open your heart wider. Open wider. And that's what Bessie's taught me, and that's what she's telling us in this picture, unknowingly, of course. But that's the message. And we're going to pause here for a second, Robert. This chapter is called A Retriever Forever. And the quote at the beginning says, being fearless isn't being 100% not fearful. It's being terrified, but you jump anyway. Taylor Swift said that. And it blows me away, because I've seen Taylor Swift perform on TV, and I cannot imagine that she's nervous when she takes the stage, but apparently she's scared to death. So I'm not a mean or heartless dog owner. To the contrary, I probably indulge Bessie more than I should. But she's got a cracked tooth on her lower right jaw. One of those canines is chipped in half. If you could look at her up close, you'd see little nicks and scars on her face. And these are her trophies from continuing to be a full-on retriever all the way through and into her blindness. One time she took off full speed after a tossed ball, but in the wrong direction. Before I could stop her, she ran straight into a tree. Momentarily stunned with blood dripping out of both nostrils, Bessie would not be consoled. She squirmed away from my sympathetic embrace and took off with her bleeding nose to the ground, eventually finding the ball, retrieving it, and dropping it at my feet. And as she stood there with her tail wagging, her watering blind eyes wide open, and her body trembling with expectation, I had no other choice but to throw the ball again, which I did, and which I will continue to do every day until my arm falls off or Bessie dies. She would never forgive me otherwise. Bessie refuses to back off. I sometimes wonder if she's stubborn, courageous, or just living blissfully in denial. But upon further reflection, who cares? She's full of joy, endlessly living in anticipation of the next adventure and willing to get banged around a bit in the process. What would the alternative be? Living your life on a leash or tied to a chain so as not to bloody your nose or chip a tooth now and then? Bessie would never forgive me for choosing the safe route, cheating her out of a full life through my own caution. No thanks, not for Bessie and not for me. Chipped teeth, bloody noses, and a few scars are nothing compared to the unmet potential of a life spent looking out the window as a safe spectator. I'll take Bessie's example for a model of how to live. And I see some questions are piling up, but I think it's best if I just keep moving, and then I'll respond to the questions in just a moment. If we were together in the room right now, I would ask you to do something a little silly, and hopefully you'd put a smile on your face and jump in and do it with a lot of gusto. But it's my theory that each of us has, it's tucked back here somewhere in our brain. It's called our dog voice. And it's the way we talk to dogs. And if we were in the same room, I would have already heard a number of your dog voices. As Bessie went around and said hello to you, you would talk to her in your best dog voice. So this chapter is called Talking to Dogs. And the quote at the beginning, it's no coincidence that man's best friend cannot talk. Sometimes when watching particularly gruff or arrogant people or aggressive people in action, I wonder to myself what their dog voices sound like. What is President Donald Trump's dog voice, or LeBron James, or Megyn Kelly's? How about Hillary Clinton's dog voice? Maybe along with releasing tax returns, candidates for elected office should submit secretly recorded copies of their dog voices. It might be interesting. Remember back when there were 15 or so Democratic candidates for president, and they had the debates, and the moderators would ask questions, and we had to make up our minds based on those answers. And I had this epiphany while I was watching one of those. What if the moderator said, each of you has 15 minutes to say something to the audience in your best dog voice? And then we could go down the list and just kind of, I think we could say, nope, not that one. Maybe, yes, definitely that one should be a candidate. Nope. Anyway, it was just a thought I had, and I think it makes me chuckle just thinking about, I would love to hear the dog voices of some of those candidates. When your pet can't see, the vocabulary of your dog voice expands exponentially. I sometimes look over my shoulder when talking to Bessie, before talking to Bessie, because if someone overheard our conversation, they might lock me up. You see, when your dog is blind, you begin to think you have to interpret the world for her. Perhaps more alarming is you begin to believe your dog can't function without you, which is utter nonsense. There are a number of dog voices I use with Bessie. One of them is the be careful voice when it's necessary to alert her that the terrain is changing or that something's in her path. And then there's the end of day snuggle voice, which is most private of all. I'd pay a healthy ransom to prevent a recording of me talking to Bessie in this context from ever becoming public. Sometimes when Bessie's meeting new people, we withhold the fact that she's blind. In each case, when her handicap's discovered, people change their dog voices, adding a more sympathetic tone. We discourage this because we believe Bessie works the angle to get food. I think we all need to be more in touch with our dog voices. When interviewing teaching candidates, I used to pay particular attention if a dog wandered into the picture, listening closely to the tone and melody of the candidate's dog voice. It provided an unfiltered look into the most empathetic and nurturing aspects of the person's soul. Marriage proposals should be delayed until thoroughly vetting a future spouse's dog voice. Same goes for college admission, getting a driver's license, or agreeing to sit next to someone on a long airplane flight. Just think how much less pretentious we would be if our dog voices were part of our profiles. And final thought, what's it like when someone speaks to you in their dog voice? May we all live long enough to find out. Next slide, please, Robert. So in our tours, when we've gone around and met with people, we've had over 100 speaking engagements. We have some great anecdotes that come out of these. I'm going to share 3 that are among my favorites. The first one doesn't relate to this photograph. The first one occurred in a senior living community in New London, New Hampshire. And there were about 35 people, 30 or 35 people in the room. And at the end of it, I was signing books and personalizing the inscriptions. And the people were talking to us and getting to know Bessie. And Bessie had discovered this one person, and she was sitting there with her head in this man's lap. And his name was Pete. He had the most beautiful blue eyes I've ever seen. And Pete was 96 years old, I think. And so I stopped and I looked over at Pete. He was right next to me in a wheelchair. And I said, Pete, what's your secret? There's 30 people in this room and Bessie's got her head in your lap. And Pete looked at me and said, I'm blind. And my hands dropped. And then it dawned on me, I had just sold Pete a book a few minutes earlier. So I said, hey, Pete, but you just bought a book. And he said, yeah, I know. My 92-year-old girlfriend's going to read it to me in bed tonight. So there's Pete for you. And then we were at the Andover Elementary Middle School in Andover, New Hampshire. And I've been in schools enough to know that the back row where the older kids hang out can be tiger country if you're a visiting presenter. And so sure enough, the 7th grade boys were back there lined up. And I was at the point in the program, I said, who has a question? And this one boy raised his hand. And so I waded in. I said, here we go. What's your name? What's your question? He said, my name's Cameron. Remember, he's 12. He said, if you could undo Bessie's blindness, would you? And I didn't think about it at all. I said, Cameron, spontaneously, my answer is no, I wouldn't, because Bessie's brought so much joy, inspired so many people, and given so much to us, I wouldn't even think about it. And the last story goes with this picture. We did a Zoom presentation for something called Adventures in Learning at Colby Sawyer College in New London, New Hampshire. And after the program, we got some nice emails and feedback. And one of them was from this woman named Jen. And we got to know Jen and established a dialogue. And it turns out that Jen won she won several medals at the 2015 Special Olympics in Los Angeles, including first place gold in the women's freestyle. And so Bessie went over and met Jen. They went for a walk together. And a couple of weeks after, we got a package in the mail. Jen sent us her gold medal from Los Angeles to Bessie. And she said, from one champion to another. And so it's in Bessie's trophy case now. And I think she looks good in that gold medal. I don't know. So I want to read one last paragraph from the book and take you back to the beginning when we said we're going to start loading up this funnel. I'm going to put a lot into it, and we want a drop to come out at the end. And this is the beginning of that. It's one paragraph. Bessie unknowingly floods me with daily reminders that each of us alone is in charge of our spirit and outlook. We can think of ourselves as poor, weak victims of unlucky turns, or the happy celebrants and survivors of life's endless challenges and tests. Our girl is my hero, plain and simple. I've been inspired by her enormous strength and embarrassed by my comparative lame weakness. So Bessie wants to do a little trick for you before we go to the last slide. I'm going to ask Ashley to bring her in here. Bess, come here, girl. Oh, there she is. She's right here. So actually, let me go to the last slide first. Can we do that, Robert? And this is the message that comes out of the funnel. Be like Bessie. it's easy to remember. It's hard to do, but it's easy to remember. And if we could all be like Bessie, I think we'd be happier, and the people around us would be a lot happier. So Bess is ready to show off for a minute now. And Robert, I don't know if you have a full screen there. Okay, Bess, come here, girl. There you go. Sit. Sit right in front of that camera. Wait, sit right there. Good girl. Okay, you ready? Stay. Here you go. Stay. Come here, Bess. Stay. Okay. Try again. Here we go. Stay. Go. Well, there's the star of the show in action. So that kind of sums it up. I'd love to answer any questions that you may have. I can click on this Q&A and.
Sure, Thomas, I can read them to you if it's easier. And by the way, Bessie eats her snacks the same way I eat my snacks. So that's good to see.
Yeah, I want all of you to try that later.
Tom, Teresa wants to know, how old is Bessie now?
All right, Bessie turned 12 on May 13th or May 30th. May 11th, I'm sorry, May 11th was her 12th birthday. And the average life expectancy for labs is 12. So, we feel like every day is just another lucky day for us. No real health issues yet either.
Yeah. Teresa also just with a comment says that Bessie is fearless and a great mentor for all of us.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we feel the same way. And we just feel so lucky that she crawled out and sat on Ashley's feet all those years ago.
As I mentioned before, Michelle says that she's already read the book and she thought it was fantastic. Does anyone else have any questions for Tom? We are at 8 o'clock, but we can go a few minutes over if anyone has any additional questions or comments.
I'm going to hold something up now.
Sure.
For those of you who are interested in the book, you can order it through Amazon or Barnes & Noble, but you could also email us and we would personalize a copy. And if we're in your area, we would just drop it off, but we could also mail it to you. And there's our email address. And you can also go to Bessie's website where you can learn more about her.
Great. And Tom, I'll include that information in the email that I send out to everyone tomorrow for sure.
Okay, and I don't know if you're Instagram users, I'm not a social media guy really, but we do have an Instagram account, and there are some really funny videos of Bessie in action that I think will make you chuckle.
All right, we'll have to check those out. If they're half as good as those photos you showed us, it's worth our while. Let's see, we do have a question from Renee. Does Bessie have any dogs or cats of her own?
No, she doesn't. She just owns us.
There you go.
We're her only pets.
Nancy says, amazing presentation. Bessie is lucky to have you and Ashley.
Well, that's very nice of you to say, but I would turn it around and say we are just so lucky. It was right about the point when her diagnosis came where we realized we don't own Bessie anymore. She owns us now. And so I appreciate the comment though. Thank you.
Great. Well, another question snuck in here. Renee says that Bessie chose the right family. I've often wondered if she chose us. That has been a question that would she have stayed in that pen on that day if she didn't approve of us? We'll never know, but I've sort of wondered that sometimes. All right, I think I have addressed all questions and comments. Tom, any last words before we wrap up?
No, just if you can all just try to be like Bessie. When you hit those tough spots, it's a good way to try to get back on track. A little bit corny, but still, it's good to remind us.
Yeah, well,
And thank you all for tuning in tonight.
Yeah, no, thank you, Tom, for the wonderful presentation, and thank you to Ashley and, of course, Bessie, and want to thank everyone who tuned in live. I want to thank the Corning Foundation. I want to thank Memorial Hall Library in Andover. I want to thank Teresa, Renee, Nancy, and Michelle for asking questions and making comments. And everyone have a wonderful evening. Thanks again, Tom. Thank you, Ashley.
All right, thank you. Thanks for all your help.